Hello, and welcome to what is my digital presentation of my senior English portfolio. And I will be calling it Syrup, and hopefully that makes sense in a little bit here. So I want to start off with going back to one of the first pieces of writing that we all did for our English major in the English studies class, which was responding to a forum asking why we read and write. And here's a few passages that I picked out of there that are still ring true to me today. So I said, I read and write because there's little I love more. That has been true, I think, since I started reading, and still true today. I find joy in a lot of sources of entertainment and art, but writing for me has just always been the most expansive, I think. Nothing can capture ideas like just simply writing them and using our power of language. And similarly, the writing process forces me to understand and develop my ideas and beliefs. So I think understanding what you believe, what you know about the world, and developing that further, and then being able to communicate that to others is very important, not just for society and interacting with others, but for understanding yourself and what you want out of life. And going on, I said, I was a media studies major my first semester of college, but the strict rules and unrewarding payoffs discouraged me enough to abandon the idea of being a political journalist. Since then, I have come to realize that writing is just as much an art form as music, acting, or painting. And what I mean by that is, for the longest time, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I knew I wanted to create things and potentially be an artist, and I thought those two were not connected. I could not conceive of a way to creatively write or or artistically write in a way that wasn't just academic or in my case political. But part of all of this thinking, I want to take it back to when I was early adolescence, like middle school. I came across this quote online, which turns out to not be a real quote by John Lennon, but I think the essence of it still rings true to me today, which is he said, when I was 5 years old, my mother always told me that happiness was the key to life. When I went to school, they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wrote down happy. They told me I didn't understand the assignment, and I told them they didn't understand life. That sounds arrogant enough to be a John Lennon quote, but I don't think it is. But nonetheless, I think that the point of it is that happiness should be your goal, and whatever you're doing should bring you happiness, not you should strive to reach some level of success or a particular job. It's more about how you feel and how you wake up every day and approach life. And I love to write, so I figured I would be a writer. And that is kind of why I ended up in the English program at USF. It's because I had to do something, and that's all I really liked to do. And another part of this is the fact that I'm human. And I think that storytelling is the most fundamental human aspect, except for maybe farming. It is everything to who we are as a species and everything in terms of how we understand our world, I believe. But I'm sure by now a lot of you are wondering why I named this portfolio and presentation Syrup. So I just want to get into that. Making syrup is a hobby of mine. I started it two years ago, and I have found that the process of making it, in addition to being beautiful, is also very enlightening, especially in terms of how we approach writing. So the act of making maple syrup begins with collecting the sap from the trees. I drilled a hole, funneled it through tubes into these buckets, which I then carry from the trees over here to this fire pit, where I boiled it down for about 8 to 9 hours into a thick, you can see it turns brown the more concentrated it gets, and finally results in something that looks like this, which is essentially unfiltered but nearly finished maple syrup. So I scrape the impurities, it's the solidified sugar that is crystallized on top during the heating process, and finally funnel those through a rag or cheesecloth and eventually bottled into a finished product. So on the left here, we have some syrup that was made with sap that I collected in the early part of March. And then on the right was sap that was collected in the second half of March. So apparently just waiting a couple weeks can drastically change the color and a little bit of the taste. It's a more earthy taste on the lighter colored, which is interesting to me. But anyway, this process I found to be so beautiful and inspiring that I wanted to create something inspired by it. So I wrote a poem which is included in my portfolio for this class. And this is just a small piece of it, but it's my favorite part of it. So I will do a reading of this. A symphony begins as the sap falls down, turns into an orchestra, how I love the sound. A band of timpani at first, beating on the steel. Mallets fall from spigots perched, this is the real appeal. Their melody becomes a harpist ballad as the bucket fills. Plucking fingers dripping, dropping, the sap, it runs clear still. A Yellowstone geyser is on my stove, its rolling waters rose. Buttered rim sends them down again to the cracks of earth below. But instead of sulfur, it smells sweet, like maple cookies on Mackinac streets. Earthly smells from the deathly swells do dance up all around me. With every bob and every boil, turn to sugar from the soil, a taste of this as if from candy, reward me for my toil. First so thin, flowing slick, but boiled down to the spoon it sticks, funneled in to bottles bright, amber syrup on my cakes tonight. So while I was writing this and creating the maple syrup itself, I noticed that the act of creating the syrup is very similar to the act of creating a story or any piece of writing. So it begins with collecting. Instead of sap, we collect ideas, sources, inspiration, characters, plot devices, things that we're going to use in the writing process, which is then us boiling down our ideas into something palatable. We funnel them through our language into something that others can understand. And then we filter out the impurities through editing and rewrites and peer review and feedback and all of the less exciting but equally as important parts of writing. And then finally, we have a finished product, which is, to me, whenever you're ready to share it with someone else. So a story is not finished when you're done writing it. It's finished when it's touched someone else. In the same way, syrup is not finished when it's heated at the bottom of a pan. It's only done when it's bottled and sealed and shined, ready to be gifted to someone else. And personally, I think that this connection was truly made for me last year, the spring of 2019. As I boiled my first batch of syrup, I also was reading through a story for the first time, which was assigned to me for my American literature class. And that story was Sonny's Blues, which is, in my opinion, literature's best solution to human suffering. It's a story about a brother who assists his younger brother with his heroin addiction and getting back on his feet after he gets released from jail. But it's also the most incredible demonstration of how art can be the answer to the human condition. There in life, we will experience suffering and joy, and art seems to be the thing that can make sense of all that and help us deal with that. And in addition to this message that I took from the story, I also love the use of irony. My favorite example is when the narrator, the older brother, is upset at Sonny wanting to use jazz as a means of dealing with his pain. So to console himself, the narrator whistles and hums a blues song, which, if I just want to shake him and make him realize that the thing that's helping him can also help his brother. But I think Baldwin does this to help us realize what the solution for Sonny truly is. And along with that, the contrast between light and dark imagery in the story is masterful, both in terms of how the characters are dealing with suffering and joy, but also the unknown and unknown, the past and the times yet to come that are so uncertain. So obviously, I was inspired by this story, and along with it, I wanted to include a short story that I wrote in this portfolio, which I called The Mess Inside. It is a story about the shifting roles between maturing brothers, more specifically, two brothers as they transition from childhood to adulthood and how that changes the dynamic of their relationship. I wrote this about a year before I read Sonny's Blues, but I could not have finished it without reading that story. Sonny's Blues helped me realize that it helped me realize what I was going for with that story, what I wanted to what themes I wanted to touch on and what possible solutions I had for the problems that I was setting up. And my story would not be what it is today, if anything at all, without Sonny's Blues. So even though it was written before, I do notice there are a lot of similar things in it, specifically the relationship between brothers, one of whom has addiction problems. But in my story, the younger brother is the one trying to assist his older brother after having those roles reversed as they transition to adulthood. The younger brother always wanted, or the older brother had always been able to save his younger brother from dangers. And now the younger brother, faced with his older brother's addiction, finds himself completely unable to return the favor of looking out for his brother. And I sort of wrap up the story with not a very clear solution, because I don't think there is one. If there was a clear solution to addiction, we wouldn't have tens of thousands of people dying in America every year from substance abuse. But I think my solution in the story ends with the two brothers just enjoying a day like they did when they were younger outside. And I think what I wanted to convey with that is that suffering is inevitable, but joy is also all around us at the same time. And where you focus is sort of where your destination will be. So moving on from that to the final piece of writing that's included in my portfolio, I decided to write about Joseph Campbell and his outline for story structure, often called the hero's journey or the monomyth. Joseph Campbell is a literary theorist, a critic from the mid-19th or the mid-20th century. And I came across him first when just watching some background videos on the story of Star Wars, where I learned that George Lucas was heavily influenced by him in the writing process, and actually claimed that he read the book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, prior to writing the original trilogy. So from there, I was very interested in what Campbell had to offer. And after reading his book, watching countless videos on YouTube, I kind of have summarized his many points into basically three main points with some subsections. So the first being departure. This is when the hero of the story is called to adventure. They're called out of their normal life to set out and embark on a journey. And in this, they are usually aided by someone who has more power than them. So this can be a knowledgeable figure, a powerful wizard like Gandalf, or the goddess Athena. And with them, with that help, they cross the threshold into the unknown. And this can be as simple as entering a dark cave, or just simply embarking on the journey past a point of no return. In which case they are initiated, they are put through trials. This is the meat of the story, where we fight the monsters and travel towards the ultimate climax, the ultimate evil. After the hero has proven their worth, they fight the main villain and then have succeeded in their original goal. From there, there's a reluctant return, where the reader, especially, I think, wants to stay in this state of adventure, but they must return home, cross the threshold back into their old world, where they then can use the powers that they've gained to help others. So my paper, I wanted to apply this story structure to some non-literary things. There are countless videos and essays about writing, and especially screenwriting, where Campbell's theories play a role. But I wanted to explore them in things like video games, where you are the hero of the story, and how you play the game can essentially change the narrative. Campbell, interestingly, suggested that dreams, when our subconscious follows the hero's journey just inherently and subconsciously, which is incredible to me. And I think if that's true, absolutely will influence the stories that we create when we're awake and feeling inspired. And then along those lines, also music. Concept albums of the 60s and 70s sometimes follow linear narratives or more complex ones, but all the same, they're parallel to this literary structure. My favorite of these albums being Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues. So this album, released in 1967, focuses on modern humanity. It's the story of a day of an average man, but it's referenced to the classical past. So as we shift from modern 60s psychedelic rock into classical orchestra, you think of past heroes and stories and Renaissance fair settings that capture the grand scheme of humanity. And also in this music, I think it captures the fact that art is a fundamental aspect of humanity. And throughout all of human history, we have been telling stories and making music. And just as this album is a demonstration and praise of the day through a human's eyes, I think Campbell's Monomyth is a demonstration of the human story and what it means to be human and have our aspirations. So I wanted to finish up my presentation, not with a summary of my portfolio, but a summary of my time as an English major. So if you know me, my two dominant pieces of my personality are my interest in literature and my interest in the outdoors, whether being that's hiking or gardening. So I just wanted to finish off briefly by saying what I have learned from books and syrup and also gardening. But that is that life on earth includes suffering, but it also includes joy. This is a lot to process, but art can help. Sometimes we don't know how to make sense of the things that happen to us or how to express the amazing things that happen to us. And I think art can be used for both of those. But making and consuming this art in those times takes work and determination. And it's not always exciting inspiration and flows of creativity. It's work. But if you do that work, it's worth it. And that I can say is the most important thing I've learned while studying English at the University of Sioux Falls. So I will leave you with this great image of me and my dog Lena out by the maple tree this year. And with that, I will finish off and say thank you to my classmates and my professors. The time at USF is invaluable to me, and I feel sorry for people that studied anywhere else because this was a truly unique experience that I don't think is a lot like other colleges. So thank you to everyone, and I look forward to seeing your presentations.